Hello, my name is Liz Sharda, and I am an individual affiliate member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. I've been involved with the Resource Parent curriculum since 2009, when I had the opportunity to participate in the pilot phase of developing this curriculum. Since then, I've facilitated several RPC workshops and have more recently trained others to facilitate RPC. I'm also a foster parent. This podcast will focus on one critical component of the Train the Facilitator process, and that is encouraging and equipping RPC facilitators to model trauma-informed care principles within the workshop environment. The Resource Parent curriculum was developed to provide resource parents with the foundational information about child traumatic stress and to help see their children, as well as behaviors, emotions, and needs through the trauma lens. With these main purposes in mind, I've come to understand that it's not sufficient to simply educate caregivers about trauma-informed parenting. We as facilitators must actually model the very principles in the training environment that we ask caregivers to adopt in their homes. It should be noted that much of the thought behind this podcast originated a few years ago when I read an article written by Leslie Lieberman and published by an organization called Multiplying Connections, which is focused on trauma-informed care. This article, which is linked here, is called Walking the Walk, Modeling Trauma-Informed Practice in the Training Environment. The article suggested 4 trauma-informed principles for the training environment, and I'll focus on those in this podcast. These principles are creating safety, maximizing opportunities for choice and control, fostering connections, and managing emotions and promoting self-reflection. I'd like to touch on each of these principles, note some ways that each of them is covered within the RPC, and finally suggest ways that facilitators can model each within the training environment for their participants. So first, the principle of creating safety is critical. We know that the experience of trauma includes a threat to safety or a lack of safety, and consequently, healing must include both physical and psychological safety. So within the RPC, an entire module, Module 4, is devoted to helping caregivers understand the concept of creating safety. So just as kids cannot heal or grow when they don't feel safe, it's difficult for caregivers to learn or to consider change if they don't feel safe. So in the training environment, facilitators can create safety in a number of ways. For example, facilitators can create safety by creating familiarity. They can introduce themselves and share about why they're facilitating the RPC workshop. They can allow participants to introduce themselves to each other. Knowing just a little bit about who's in the room can really increase participants' feelings of safety. Facilitators can also create safety through predictability. They can let participants know what's coming by verbally outlining the schedule, particularly around breaks and ending time. And it's also important to stick to that schedule, of course. Facilitators can also let participants know when difficult or emotional content is coming. Another way to create safety among participants is to give permission to learn in different ways. In workshops, it can be helpful to acknowledge learning differences and name ways that each different learning style will be addressed. For example, I include small boxes of fidgets on participants' tables for those learners who may be more tactile or kinesthetic. Those boxes contain Play-Doh, pipe cleaners, stress balls, colored pencils, Post-it notes, and I let them know at the beginning that these materials are there for them to use at any time. So the second principle of trauma-informed training that I want to talk about is maximizing opportunities for choice and control. Trauma, of course, is at its core about the lack of choice and control. Healing must include opportunities for choice and control. Within the resource parent curriculum, caregivers are encouraged to offer choices to their children whenever possible and at a developmentally appropriate level. In the RPC training environment, facilitators can also create opportunities for choice and control for participants. For example, this can be as simple as allowing participants to choose where they'll sit. Another opportunity for choice is when and how to share. Sharing is a big part of the RPC experience, but facilitators can give opportunities for participants to share rather than requiring them to do so. A third example relates back to the safety strategy of letting participants know when difficult or emotional content is coming. This also gives participants the chance to choose if and how they engage with that difficult content. Facilitators can preface difficult content by giving permission for participants to take a break, either physically or mentally, if the material is too overwhelming. Knowing that tough material is coming and having permission to check out for a bit gives participants control over what they see and hear and how they may need to care for themselves. The third principle of trauma-informed training is fostering connections. Feeling connected counteracts the experience of trauma, which is often isolating. Since trauma and traumatic stress lead to isolation and feelings of being alone, healing and building resilience must include connection. Within the RPC, Module 7 is devoted to maintaining and creating connections for our kids. In the RPC training environment, it's important to foster connections with and among caregivers. In fact, when I facilitate the RPC, the connections formed between participants is often just as beneficial as the material itself. Parenting a child who's experienced trauma can be incredibly isolating. So to be given the opportunity to connect with others who may also feel this way, who may be experiencing similar behaviors in their homes, is incredibly powerful. There are many ways that RPC facilitators can consciously help to foster connections in the training environment. For example, facilitators can begin fostering connections through introductions. Icebreakers are often silly and may sometimes seem to take away from training time. However, seen through the lens of trauma-informed training, they can serve the purpose of establishing connections between participants from the very beginning, which will potentially and hopefully strengthen throughout the workshop. Facilitators can also foster connections through the activities built into the RPC. Reflecting on the My Child worksheet or discussing strategies for addressing emotional hotspots in Module 4 can bring out commonalities among participants and help them feel understood and connected. Another simple way that RPC facilitators can foster connections is through food. Food brings people together. Offering a meal at the beginning of a workshop or snacks and drinks during breaks is a good informal way of fostering connections in the training environment. The fourth and final principle of trauma-informed training that I want to address is that of managing emotions and promoting self-reflection. So as we know, the experience of trauma can produce strong emotions: fear, anxiety, shame, anger. Trauma treatment and healing in general must include awareness of those emotions, opportunities to name them and reflect on them, and strategies to address them in healthy ways. Parenting kids who've experienced trauma can produce strong emotions within caregivers as well. Within the Resource Parent curriculum, Module 5 includes content on helping kids identify and manage emotions through the cognitive triangle and activities like the What's My Emotion game. Module 3 introduces the concept of the caregiver as an emotional container. There are also opportunities to reflect incorporated throughout the curriculum. For example, the feelings thermometer asks participants to check in at various points and identify their internal temperature. So there are other strategies that facilitators can use to promote managing emotions and self-reflecting among participants. It can be helpful for facilitators to think of themselves as emotional containers for participants. Just as our kids need to know that their emotions are not too much for us as caregivers, RPC participants need to feel heard and understood and validated in their strong emotions. Facilitators can listen for the feeling and the need behind participant stories and questions, and then seek to name and validate those. Facilitators can also leave room for reflection after material or activities, asking participants to name what they're feeling about what they've just seen or heard. Another way that facilitators can promote managing emotions and self-reflection is by sharing how they themselves have done this. Facilitators can share examples of their own emotions and how reflecting upon them has been beneficial to them. This not only provides an example of trauma-informed principles in action, but also serves to normalize some of the emotions that participants might be feeling. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list. There are many other ways that these trauma-informed principles can be implemented in the training environment. But in conclusion, it's not simply enough to talk about trauma-informed care within RPC workshops. Facilitators must also model these principles for and with participants. Many of the ideas presented here are simply good training practices that also happen to be trauma-informed. Many are likely already being done by RPC facilitators. However, it's important to consider the purpose they serve and to carry them out with the intention of creating a trauma-informed training environment. As many of us train and develop future RPC facilitators, this is a critical piece of that training. So I hope that this has prompted you to think of ways that you can thoughtfully incorporate trauma-informed principles into your training environment and how you can train others to do so as well.
This marks the end of this podcast. For more information about the Resource Parent Curriculum, please visit us online at learn.nctsn.org/RPC. Thank you for listening.